The strangest government in Israel's history is finally set to collapse, and while Bennett tries to bow out gracefully, kind of failing by the way, Netanyahu is trying desperately to form another government before elections are called for October. We're the Israel guys, and today we're talking Israeli politics.
Welcome back to the Israel Guys, where we believe that in a world of fake news, you should connect to the true and authentic stories of Israel. Guys, if you've yet to subscribe, go ahead and do that. And don't forget to ring the notification bell as well as leave a comment.
Guys, if you didn't know, we have the Israel Guys Daily, which is a podcast that comes out every Monday through Friday, and it comes out in the morning so that when you wake up, you can get 15 minutes. If you jump in your car to go to work, you can get 15 minutes of the latest news straight out of Israel. But what's really exciting is that we're now going to release one of the Israel Guys Daily podcasts on our YouTube channel right here every single Monday. So you can catch a video now Mondays and Thursdays on the YouTube channel. And the podcast you can catch every Monday through Friday on your favorite podcast platform. Make sure you subscribe wherever you listen or watch, guys. You do not want to miss it. And by the way, I would love it if you'd go over to Twitter and give the Israel Guys a follow. I'm starting to get in on the conversation on Twitter, trying every day there. Lots of content. So that's kind of like on the go news. As soon as the news broke about the Knesset dissolving, which we're talking about today, right, got right out there on Twitter. So go over to Twitter at the Israel Guys and give us a follow. We would highly appreciate it. And if you have not checked out our volunteer programs here in Israel, you want to do that because there's only like less than 2 months left to register for the first trips, which start the first week of September this year. If you didn't know, the Israel Guys is part of a Christian volunteer organization operating in Judea and Samaria, Israel's biblical heartland, and we bring people to Israel to serve Israeli farmers. But it's a boots-on-the-ground tour/volunteer program, and it's a way to connect to the land and the people of Israel's heartland. It's an experience like none other, and you don't want to miss out on it. Registration is open right now. 2-week trips, 3-week trips, 5 weeks, 6 weeks, tree planting trips, grape harvest trips, all kind of agricultural projects. You're going to want to check those out at serveisrael.com. And you don't want to wait because registration is open right now. We do have deadlines. First one is coming up in about 7 weeks. And we have a capacity limit for each trip. In the past, we've had 300 to 500 people in one fall season in a period of 3 months. And right now, each trip is capped at 50 people. And we're definitely expecting to hit that limit very fast. So if you're interested in a life-changing volunteer program experience here in Israel this fall, go to serveisrael.com. Check out all of the opportunities. We'll have the link in the description below. Josh, we have to talk about Israel's government finally crashing because it lasted a lot longer than most people's predictions. But it is official. On June 13th, last week, Yamina is Prime Minister Naftali Bennett's party. Yamina member Nir Orbach bolted from the coalition, saying that he would not return until the Judea and Samaria regulation law was passed, which is currently set to expire within the next week. That is the law that basically allows civilian law to be enacted in Judea and Samaria, and it has to be renewed every certain, I can't remember exactly how, I think it's every like 5 years. And it's set to expire.
Replacing the annexation.
Right, well, it's replacing sovereignty, which is also a problem. I covered this in a video 2 weeks ago because they should apply sovereignty. But as it stands right now, this law expires, which they did not vote to pass it just to spite the government because the opposition supports Judea and Samaria, at least some of them do, but they voted against the law just to spite and bring down the government. And guess what? It worked. Because the government has come crashing down Monday night, just 2 days ago. PM, Prime Minister Naftali Bennett, and Foreign Minister Yair Lapid announced that they would bring forward a bill to dissolve the Knesset and automatically bring the country to elections in about 4 months. Most likely they would be held on October 25th, which is right after the fall holidays. Rosh Hashanah, Yom Kippur, Sukkot, Feast of Tabernacles. But interestingly enough, under the original coalition agreement, Yair Lapid will immediately become prime minister. So he's foreign minister, and Naftali Bennett will become foreign minister, and Yair Lapid will become prime minister.
Which for conservatives, if bad could get worse, this would be your rundown.
Right.
If we lose Bennett as prime minister and Yair Lapid comes in,
Yair Lapid is like a center leftist.
Yeah.
But he might be on the same level as Benny Gantz, not to bring up that argument again or anything like that. He's definitely a leftist, though.
Here's
He's
the problem.
not like the worst left in the government, but he's definitely left.
Here's the big problem.
He's pro two-state solution. Hey, we agreed on something. Way to go.
Pro two-state, and that's where we say, hey, sorry, that's not a good fit. It's just such a leftist mentality. I don't get even how it's even popular in Israel. Every Israeli knows that that's just absolutely impossible. Two-state solution is absolutely dead and gone. It's only in a political sphere that people would even talk about something like that. And guess what? It's really only in an international political sphere to make international politicians feel juicy and nice. So it's only to try to warm relations with leftist international governments. That's the only reason to bring up two-state. And that's the only reason why he would be pro two-state is because, and he knows better. Totally knows better.
He's a former TV anchor, so he's kind of like a guy with an appearance to keep up and kind of like a people pleaser. So we'll talk about him more in a minute. But right now, he's going to be the prime minister that will greet President Joe Biden on his visit to Israel and the Middle East, set next month, right? He's supposed to visit next month.
You'll have 13th and 14th. He'll be here. You know what?
So that's
I'm really
a few weeks.
That's going to be a real mess. You know. It's going to be a real mess. Yair Lapid and Biden together. I mean, they're not. It doesn't matter what they say because not that America really, at least the president's not going to understand what's happening anyway. Right. But the impact of that is going to be pretty severe.
Mm-hmm. So as it stands right now, and actually just before we hit record, because politics are changing by the minute here. So by the time you watch this, could have changed a little bit more. But as it stands right now, the resolution or the law to dissolve the Knesset, which is Israel's parliament, was passed the first reading right before we started filming, recording here in the studio. And it still needs like a final reading to be able to be passed. And Nir Orbach is like the head of the committee or the committee that has to bring that law to pass. It's complicated. I'm trying to make it simple. But they're going to delay it as long as possible, which will be like early next week, Monday or Tuesday. Basically, what this means is people can try to form a new government without sending the country to elections this week, okay? If they can keep the law from being passed in the final reading to dissolve the government, and Bibi Netanyahu is desperately trying to form a government in the interim. Now, I don't quite understand exactly how it's going to work, if the government will be formed and they'll still go to elections, or if they could form a new coalition and not go to elections. But either way, Bibi Netanyahu is trying to form a government. He's been talking to everyone. As it stands right now, he can definitely put a coalition together with about 55 seats, which is 6 seats short of the 61-seat majority. His options for joining a coalition would be blue and white Defense Minister Benny Gantz, who has 8 seats. However, that's pretty unlikely unless maybe he was offered the position of prime minister. There's reports that say he has been offered that, and he's already turned them down, so he's probably not a good prospect. New Hope is Gideon Sa'ar. They have 6 seats, so that would be exactly 61. But he's a pretty staunch, fierce anti-Bibi guy, and he's declared very adamantly in the past that he would never be a part of bringing Bibi back to the prime ministership. Other options, Yamina? I don't know, probably not, because they're in hot water right now. And plus, he started with 7 seats, and they're down to 4 right now because they've had 3 MKs bolt the coalition. The Nir Orbach could come back, I guess. But they've had 3 out of their 7 bolts, so they're not looking too good right now. So chances of Netanyahu forming a government in the interim, not so good. Again, they're voting on it right now. It could be pushed off to early next week, but we'll have an update for you for sure by a week from now.
All this means that former now Prime Minister Bennett is now the shortest serving prime minister in Israel's history. And if Yair Lapid follows him up here and they're not able to get a coalition, Yair Lapid is the standing prime minister now. He will most likely beat Bennett as being the shortest next prime minister.
We could play a game. I didn't put this in the notes, but we could play a game of like which MKs are going to survive this transition. Yeah. I'd say number 1, not going to survive, Naftali Bennett. Although I would like to have a caveat that for some reason in Israeli politics, memory seems to be very short term. So I'm not going to be too surprised if Bennett returns to the scene at some point, even if it's years down the road. But I'm pretty for certain we're going to be saying bye-bye to Naftali Bennett right now, because he just has not done good. He started out really well. He was the head of the Yesha Council. Yesha is basically in charge of Judea and Samaria. It's the regional council that's in charge of all of Judea and Samaria. That's how he started. Very right-wing, hardcore conservative guy. Something happened to him, and he ended up playing with the Islamic Jihad Party and joining coalition. And he's just not good.
Yeah. He would do good to retire. That would
Yes.
just be, yeah. He should get on out of there.
Yair Lapid, I think he'll probably survive. Ayelet Shaked, 50-50. I give her a 50-50 chance.
What?
She's done some good things. I think she's managed to kind of like stay in the middle. So I don't know. I could definitely see her surviving. Maybe.
We'll see, but what are the polls saying?
Can't go by this, but current polls by Channel 12 News, and this is a direct report from Arutz Sheva, showed that if Israeli Prime Minister Naftali Bennett and the Yamina Party do not run in the upcoming elections, all of their votes will go to leftist parties. That's not good, okay? According to the results of the survey, former Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu leads the other candidates with regards to who the best candidate for the Prime Minister is. Compared to Bennett, 47% said Netanyahu is more suitable to be Prime Minister, while 23% said Naftali Bennett. That's worse than Joe Biden, actually. 23%. That's a lot worse than Joe Biden. 25% of respondents said neither Bennett or Netanyahu is suitable for the position. 5% said they don't know. Obviously, polls 4 months before elections will happen. Can't tell us a whole lot, but we'll keep you posted. Josh, you had something here on successes that Bennett had.
Well,
maybe some of them serious, some of them a little bit.
Yeah, well, we got successes. Well, there was, as soon as he kicked off the government, he had the budget passed. The budget here in Israel, the state budget,
shouldn't be on the list of successes.
No.
But for Israel, it is because it was 2 years before that they couldn't pass a budget.
Just waiting. And finally, he got it passed. Well, the nitty gritties about that pass we'll talk about in a little bit, but just we'll give it to him right now that was good in the beginning. Problems in Gaza were kind of
pretty quiet, for the last year.
Decent. He did have a decent strong hand on him. Like he said, hey, if you do it, we'll
on
respond.
Gaza,
and he actually went and responded. It was good.
Strong on Gaza, not strong on terrorism.
Yeah, exactly.
Because, I mean, it was basically
Terrorism
like
was
an
up.
intifada happened here in Israel from like December 2021 through about a month ago, really.
Yeah.
It was like a mini intifada. It was really bad.
So that's all we could really come up with. There's really nothing to this government. The things
that's what I call it, the nothing government.
Nothing happened except for the Islamic, we like to call it the Islamic Jihad Party.
Yeah.
The Ra'am Party was the Islamic movement. So
they're officially part of the southern branch of the Islamic movement of Israel.
They made some big wins. And this government provided a perfect safe haven for the Islamic movement. And now if that makes you shudder and cringe, it should. Because an Israeli government in Israel, the miracle of Israel and the establishment of the state, giving way now, 70 plus years later, to Islamic Jihad movement taking over in the government, and that was the biggest win of this last government. It should make you cringe, and if you're not cringing yet, just wait. So this, the chairman of the Ra'am Party, the Islamic Movement Party, Ra'am, is Mansour Abbas. Now, Mansour Abbas, as we said, Islamic movement. I just want to drill that in. Islamic movement. Islamic, we're going to say that 100 times this show, just so you get it. Islamic movement, which is anti-Zionist and seeks to take down Israel as a Jewish state. What? I just said that. Yes, it's exactly what they're there to do. They're there to take down the Jewish state. But what? He's in the government. And I would try to compare to America, but actually the same kind of things are happening there.
Yeah.
You have hostile to the country, hostile to the state of Israel, politicians, MKs, standing in the government. And let me tell you this, if you're not cringing again, they're directly connected to who? The Muslim Brotherhood. Now,
Ouch.
what in the world? The Muslim Brotherhood inside the Israeli government? Yes, it's I know. It's absolutely outrageous, but this is the government. Now, how much money did they give to this Islamic, jihadic, Muslim Brotherhood connected party? Well, when that budget that we mentioned, that was semi-success, right? Because they passed a budget. Well, in that budget, the only way to pass it was to appease the Islamic Party, right? With $16 billion.
We're talking
billion
dollars or shekels?
Dollars. $16 billion
It's a lot of money
to the Islamic movement.
With
Ra'am
the
Party.
authority on how to spend it, right?
With the authority that they could choose how to spend it. Of course, they said on paper that it goes to infrastructure. Now, what kind of infrastructure? That's where the question marks come. Now, not only that, we're talking about $16 billion into the Islamic Arab, and so obviously they're putting this money straight into the Arab communities throughout Israel proper, okay? We talk about Israel proper. Maybe a better term would be pre-1967 Israel. Okay, they're going into these Arab villages. Remember, with the same ideology, either side. Pre-1967, the same Arabs, same names, same families. It's the same. Islamic movement is connected. Remember Muslim Brotherhood? Yeah, they all hate Israel. So 16 billion go to the Islamic movement in Israel to establish the Arab sector, to establish more permanence in the Arab communities.
Like in a perfect world, that would be great, right?
Yeah,
we have 2 million Arab Israeli citizens living alongside Israel with perfect equal rights, and we're not against that. But what the problem is, and what we are against, is that an literal mini intifada happened in the last 6 months, and guess who most of the terrorists were? Arab Israeli citizens. So yes, we're 100% pro the upstanding, good Arab Israeli citizens that are Zionists and that are for the state of Israel and that are patriotic. There's an amazing spokesman, Hasbara guy on social media that is an Arab advocating for Israel. Many of them are, but the problem is with when you have the ones that are supporting Muslim or Islamic terrorism, Islamic jihad, and that was happening a lot.
Yeah.
So that's where we run into these problems.
Look, this is what we got to connect here, though. This is crazy. So this bill gets passed, $16 billion going into it. Now, what happens immediately after? They pass this obscure bill called the electricity bill. And this electricity bill goes and passes. The bill passes. And they legalize 130,000 illegal squatters, Arab squatters, Israeli Arab, Bedouin.
This is mostly in Israel's desert,
mostly in the
Negev,
desert,
Bedouin.
But
basically, Bedouin cities, they're all illegal. And instead of dealing with it, they just legalized them.
Legalize them. Now connect it. You just got $16 billion. And then you legalize 130,000 illegal squatters, Arab squatters, on not Judea and Samaria. We're not talking about we're talking about pre-1967. There's a takeover happening. Not only, and we'll talk about it in a second, not only in Judea and Samaria, but Israel proper is being taken over by radical Islamists with ID cards to Israel, Islamic jihad, like takeover of areas in Israel proper, pre-1967 Israel. The whole Negev desert and even up north in the Galilee region is being taken over by drastic, big time, thousands and thousands of acres being taken over. And just so happens again, remember connected, $16 billion are going into those areas now because what? They're legalized. They've got access to electricity and sewer and water and not only electric. Everything was connected to that bill. Once they connected that, everything else came across.
Talking about illegal building and illegal infrastructure and illegal squatters, we have to bring up that at the end of a Prime Minister Naftali Bennett prime ministership, 20% of Area C in Judea and Samaria is now in Palestinian Authority hands. That's not supposed to happen.
No.
Again, Oslo Accords divided into A, B, and C. A, Palestinian only. B, both Israeli and Palestinian, but mostly Palestinian building. Area C, most of it for Israeli, Israeli building infrastructure communities. 20% of it has now been illegally taken over. How many structures do we know? 75,000 illegal structures built in Area C. What's happening? Nothing. The nothing government that's finally being dissolved did nothing. But we can't put all the blame on Bennett because this didn't just happen in the last year. This happened also during the years and years and years of the Bibi Netanyahu prime ministership and government as well.
Luke, I want to touch on it really quickly because when we say 20% and 30% and blah, 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 20%, it just goes right over everybody's head. Let me just boil this down really quickly. We got to move on, but I've got to get this. Judea and Samaria is about almost 1.5 million acres. That's the land mass of this area. When we're talking about Area C, we're talking about around 800,000 acres of land. Now, when we talk about 20% has been taken by the PA, Palestinian Authority, we're talking about 160,000 acres. 160,000 acres have been taken by the PA. This was Oslo. If you give Oslo any credit, the leftist land allotments decided by Oslo and the rest of the leftist world that Israel should be designated into these ABC zones, and C, according to the leftists, would be 60% of the land mass, and that would be given to Israel to maintain and use those areas. And now, of that little piece that Israel got control of as government land, 160,000 acres of that have been taken. 160,000 acres have been taken, which now we X that off of Israel's so-called 60% that Israel has claim over, and now we're down to 40%. Now, of that 40% that Israel maintains as Israeli government land, how much of that is actually built on? That's the big question, right? Well, only 65,000 acres. Remember, the total is about 1.5 million acres. Only 65,000 acres of this landmass is built. That's about 8%. Built on has been developed by Israel. Now, on the other side, there's about 51.5%, 700,000 acres of it have been built on by the Arabs. The odds are ridiculous. Now, the
other thing to bring out too,
yeah,
is that there's a lot of open land, open for development.
Yeah, about 600,000 acres.
The occupation is a fantasy because nobody's occupying other people's land. The Judea and Samaria is open land. But like you mentioned, tiny fraction of a minority is Jewish settlements, Jewish communities, building infrastructure. Large percentage of it, Palestinian Arabs, many of them illegally taking over, even in Israeli territory of Area C, but also a lot of open land.
Luke, we got to discuss more about this, but we don't have time. We're moving on.
Yeah. Just quickly before we wrap up, what would a Yair Lapid prime ministership look like? As it stands right now, it looks like we're going to have Yair Lapid as prime minister for the next 4 months, including during President Joe Biden's visit to Israel. You already heard he's pro two-state solution.
Yeah.
But if you really want to know what he's going to be like, let's ask the Palestinian Authority, because they had pretty negative things to say about Bennett, saying he didn't support a two-state solution and that he didn't view Mahmoud Abbas as a peace partner, but they did have this to say about Yair Lapid. And this is right after the news broke about the government dissolving. They said, quote, "We have been waiting for the rotation when he becomes prime minister. We don't have any illusions that Lapid would launch peace talks, but things would get easier, and that gives us hope." This is a Palestinian Authority official. Now, on the bright side, he's only got 4 months at the most, unless he somehow becomes prime minister after elections. But the PA is definitely looking at Yair Lapid as a much better partner for peace negotiations and getting what they want than they were for Naftali Bennett. The other big question is former Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu. He's been prime minister for 12 years. He's definitely the most popular man here in Israel to lead the government. But the question is he the right answer? He definitely is just over the top excited that the government's falling apart. No question about it. He has announced that he's going to try and return back to power in the next elections, if not before. The question is there enough MKs in the government who have an anything but Bibi stance to keep him from forming a government? A lot of MKs, the whole reason we've had all this chaos and stalemates and no governments and stuff for years is because everybody's so anti-Bibi Netanyahu. We don't have time to get into all that right now, but the question is that going to change if elections are held in October? Current polls showing him only getting 60 seats for a coalition, which is one short, and that's the way it's been for years. So a lot of things need to change for elections. And like we talked about before, 75,000 illegal structures in Area C in Judea and Samaria, they weren't all built under Bennett. He only had a year in power. There was really only so much he could do. A lot of them were built under Netanyahu. Yes, he is pro Judea and Samaria, but he's also
He's also a politician.
Appeasement. Yeah, like appeasing the world.
Yeah.
So, in conclusion, what can we take away from this? What some are terming the worst government in Israel's history is now coming to an end. I'm not sure I could say for sure, but it's definitely, yes, not a good government.
We hope it's coming.
Definitely the strangest government. I call it the nothing government because it was made up of right, left, and Muslim parties, which is just it's basically like saying, I don't know, you can't even compare it to the United States. It's like the Democrats and the Republicans are both controlling. It's like you have a Democratic president and a Republican vice president.
Except we have like a pro-ISIS movement over here that they pull into. Like
Muslim Brotherhood,
ridiculous.
It's not entirely true that this was a nothing government because we had a massive high for terrorism. Illegal Bedouin structures legalized, tons of money given to a radical Muslim party, and Israel really caved a lot to the Palestinian Authority. You see, even the U.S. pushing to reopen the Palestinian consulate in Jerusalem, rightly closed under President Trump. So what can you guys do? Well, you can definitely pray and support Israel to elect a strong right-wing government in October, if elections are called, which looks like they will be. And also pray that the right-wing leaders and members of Knesset who are in the government will put aside their egos to do what's right for the country. That's probably the biggest thing, and that's what's kept Israel from having a right-wing government in the past several years, is a lot of egos. And I know we don't have that at all in the United States. Nothing. Like no political egos at all.
You got to get this straight, Luke, that Israel is a conservative nation, and and if everybody just got along, it would be like way more conservative.
That's what's funny. We have like a government made up of conservative and left parties, and then the opposition was like mostly conservative parties.
Yeah.
So, yes, they're all there. There's plenty of them. They just don't want to work together. Guys, make sure you don't forget to check out serveisrael.com to sign up for a volunteer trip. Check out all of the options there. We would love to see you in person, Josh and I, here in Israel this fall. Make sure you subscribe wherever you listen or watch. Catch us every single week, Monday through Friday. Get the conversation. What do y'all think? In the comments below. We'd love to hear you. Remember, tune out the fake news and tune into what is actually happening here in the heartland of Israel. We'll see you next week. We're the Israel Guys. Guys, thanks so much for watching. Two quick things before you go. One, smash that subscribe button. Make sure you hit the notifications bell so you don't miss out on any more of our content. Secondly, if you want to help us produce more stories and authentic truth straight from Israel's heartland, you can do so at patreon.com/theisraelguys or at our very own website. It's theisraelguys.com. Both links are in the description below.